I'll roll first.
She's just asking.
Yes.
Good evening. We'll get our meeting called to order. I do thank everybody for their patience. We had an executive session that went a little longer than we had anticipated. So without further ado, we'll go to roll call. Madam President.
Very quickly, all Secretary, all 5 board members are now here.
Wonderful. Next, we'll go to the Pledge of Allegiance. We have with us Mrs. Hackett, who will lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Seeing that we do not have anybody that chooses to speak before the board in public participation, we'll move straight to consent. May I get a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving right along into action, our first action item is a second reading of Policy 2210. It says it's going to be read by the Policy Committee. Pam, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. Just catch me off guard. This is the second reading of Policy 2210 that we offered up at the last board meeting, and we have decided to delete Policy 2250 as it did not address the needs of this particular item, and this item about innovative language could be moved into 2210, which covers all policies on anything that's in the curriculum.
So we have a recommendation and a second reading for Policy 2210. May I get a motion on the table about Policy 2210 with the additional language about innovative?
I so move.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hackett. Discussion? Mr. Phillips.
I just want to express my appreciation to the Policy Committee for being responsive to concerns that I raised.
You're welcome.
And clearly we thought your concerns were valid, and we wanted to be sure to include those, and that language is there, so thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Next, moving on to change orders for the Carmel High School synthetic turf project, we have Mr. McMichael.
Thank you. This is a change order that totals as an add change order of $27,197. It includes a number of things. I'll highlight at least 2 or 3 of them. I would say all the changes that are here, if it relates to the construction, they were a result of unforeseen conditions or undetermined conditions, one of the two. So an example of the undetermined conditions would be there's the first item is noted is to add 3 cleanouts for the storm sewer at the practice fields. That's an example where when we put the bids out, we did not have all the specifics from the city of Carmel. We knew it, and the city knew it as well, so this wasn't a surprise. But this is a rather unique project for the city, and so in terms of what they'll require, and this is an example that we agreed that and we also didn't want to delay the process because this had a very tight schedule, so we really need to get started as soon as we could, and so we understood that this would be a possibility that the city could come and say, well, now that we fully see what you're doing, we would want you to add these 3 cleanouts, for example. So that's an example of that. In the case of the third item, it was revised grading at the northwest corner along that same line, that once we got into the project, it was either something that the city requested that we do, really ultimately require that we redo. Now, in the case of item number 4, that's actually a credit. It's referred to as fast tracking, but that's not. It's fast track payment. That's the contractor's terminology, because they gave us a credit of 1.5% of the amount due if we paid them like within 2 or 3 days, and so we took advantage of that to save the school corporation a little bit more money by taking a credit on that. There is an item under the second change order that references overtime, And again, because this project's on a very tight time schedule, and based on weather conditions and so forth, we were running behind schedule and felt it was appropriate to spend a little money on overtime to move us toward getting back on schedule. So, which is where we're at this point. It continues to be a very tight schedule, but you're trying to predict the weather and a whole variety of things in a project like this. And so that's the reason for the overtime. It wasn't to get it done. It was to get it done sooner than it otherwise would, but not sooner than the schedule called for. We're just trying to keep up with the schedule. And so that would be my comments relative to this change order.
Roger, thank you for those detailed explanations. So we have the recommendation to approve the change orders for the turf project. May I get a motion on the table? Thank you. Discussion. Mrs. Knowles?
Yes, I just have one question. This is the project that we're also doing in conjunction with the Dad's Club, is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it is.
So are they assuming any of the change orders, or are we assuming the whole amount?
We're assuming the whole amount. We hadn't anticipated them participating in the change order portion. I don't know if this was even on the area that they are supporting. As far basically, the agreement with the Dad's Club is that they would pay for one of the 2 practice fields.
Right, but I mean,
And
if
so-
there's things that we didn't anticipate in the cost, wouldn't they assume some of those costs?
Possibly. Again, I honestly hadn't considered that. At the very least, I would say possibly if it were in a field, because we're doing 4 fields.
Right.
And if it was associated with the field that they were paying the cost of.
So is it?
I don't know if it's on the particular field or not.
Would be the overtime part, for example, would get those practice
Fields done.
So is
But we
that
were
something
paying-
we can pursue?
We can. I'm a little hesitant because in that example, we needed to get the practice fields done, not because we needed the practice fields, but because we needed them to get ready earlier than they were going to be otherwise in order to do the competition field. And because we couldn't get them off the competition field until they had a place to go. So it ultimately was a result of our need to have the competition field finished. It didn't really have anything to do with the practice fields. It was just that we needed a place to go. So I don't know that I would see that as a responsibility of the Dad's Club because of our schedule.
Okay, so if any of these other costs or anything that comes up after this one, if it's related to their field or,
Yeah, then certainly there would be reason to consider that they would be, because if they had come up in the first place, they would have shared in the cost. So, yeah, I think your point's well taken.
Mr. Phillips?
Thank you. Roger, you've helped me a great deal to understand the scheduling issues, the reason for the overtime and so forth, and you've alluded to just now a need to have a place to go after that.
Yes.
Could you talk just a little bit about that? I think I've got almost the whole idea. I mean,
I'll try, and that's why I asked Ron to attend this meeting in particular, because he certainly knows more about the details of it than I do. But I will tell you that we put a group of people together that had interest in these fields in terms of getting them in the first place, getting them done, when it needed to be done, and so forth, in terms of getting input from the athletic director and the coaches and so forth. So we all know how heavily these fields are used, not only for athletics, but performing arts and so forth. And so the challenge is where do we start? And so we couldn't, for example, start the competition field first because it was still being used in the spring for track. And so it became a matter of scheduling as to when we could get access. Well, we weren't practicing on the practice fields in the spring. So we started there because nobody needed to use those in the spring. And then once we started there, then we though couldn't give up the main field, the competition field, because now we've got summer practice and they need place to practice. So the plan was finish the practice fields first, then we'll offload the competition field to the practice field. So it's a kind of a domino effect, and then the soccer field is in this discussion as well. at the soccer stadium. So, because we're talking about 4 different fields, all of which have been used, of course. It's just, they were grass, but 3 out of 4 of them were grass, but they're all heavily used, and particularly at the same time we're trying to do construction, which is spring and summer. So it became a real dance trying to get all these pieces in place. And then, as I said earlier, the nature of the project such that you're guessing how many bad weather days you have, and that changes depending on where you're at in the process. So,
So where are we in the process?
well, I only asked the end answer, and that is, are we going to be ready when school starts? So the answer is, we're pretty sure. Ron's been doing this too long. He never says positively, but he has been doing it long enough that when he says pretty sure, I'm pretty sure. We know it'll be close, but just, I didn't know it was going to rain tonight. So I don't know how much that affects this project, but early on, I know it would have affected a lot because it's a lot of dirt, earthwork, and so forth. But we're fortunate, we're past that in a number of these fields to where, the rain's not as big a problem as it was early on. So we still think we'll make it for those early school events.
Any other points of discussion? Okay, looks like we're ready to take a vote. All in favor of supporting the change orders at the Carmel High School Synthetic Turf Project, signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. Next, moving into the non-bargaining group salaries, Mr. McMichael.
Thank you. We have a recommendation for, as you said, non-bargaining group salaries, and first with regard to professional staff, and the question was asked, well, who's professional staff? So let me answer that question for the benefit of the public. The professional staff would be, we'd start by saying these are salaried employees. That's one distinction. But it includes specifically then our administrators, our administrative assistants, our department chairs, our student services coordinators, our occupational therapists and physical therapists, and our nurses. So that would be the group of all of which are salaried employees versus paid hourly, and so that's the professional staff. And then later, our classified staff is basically everybody else, except teachers, because as board knows, we have a negotiated contract with teachers, which will be starting soon. So the classified staff is basically everybody else, from instructional assistants, custodians, secretaries, et cetera. So first, with regard to the professional staff, we're proposing a salary adjustment of providing increment, which is the step increase, for those that are in a position to get a step increase, and then a 1% increase for the first step of those salary schedules and the top step. So if you're a most senior employee and at the top of the salary schedule, then your raise, your increase would be 1%. And if you are a newer employee not at the top of that schedule, your increase would be the step increase. It's only been recently that employees and board alike would have assumed that increment's just a given. And it wasn't, frankly, it wasn't necessarily even seen as a raise. It was seen as an entitlement, and it's just, you had a step, you had another year experience, you got another year. And that's no longer the case, which is why it's here. And I've had, a few employees say, why didn't I get my step increase? Because for the last 20 years or 10 or whatever that they've been here, they would have gotten that step increase on, July 1st. So that's number one. Number two, we're also proposing a 2% salary stipend for these employees that are rated effective or highly effective, like our teachers, and not for all these employees, but most of these employees are under a similar rating system where they're evaluated and then rated as between ineffective and highly effective, and so they would not receive any raise if they were rated less than effective. And that's not stated here, but that we take that as a given now. And for most of these employees, that would be the law as well. Then the third item is we're proposing a contribution to a health savings account for those employees that choose the high deductible health insurance plan, and has been in the last 2 years, that contribution would be $1,000 if they took a single plan, health plan, or $2,000 if they signed up for family coverage. We're clearly trying to incentivize our employees to consider the high deductible plan. That, coupled with the wellness center that we opened a year ago, has proven very successful, and we continue to encourage our employees to consider that. It may not be the best option for all of them, but we think it would be for a number of them. And there is no increase in health insurance this year. Again, this is the second year in a row, so that's worth mentioning, given what that costs when there is an increase. So that's on the professional staff. With the recommendation with regard to the classified staff, then, is essentially the same recommendation absent the bonus amount, or the stipend amount. And as the board knows, with teachers next year, for 14-15, the state's providing what they call a performance award grant. And across the state of Indiana, the state is providing about $30 million to reward teachers, as the statute said, to give cash awards to teachers that are effective or highly effective. And then every school district will get some portion of that $30 million. And there's a way that's determined, and I won't go into all that detail, but they're not providing that for other employees. And so that's one of the reasons, the difference here in terms of one having the bonus and the other not. So that's the recommendation that we would make for you at this time. And this would be, if it doesn't say this, it would be effective July 1st, which is when their contracts come up.
Thank you very much for explaining that to us, Roger. So may I get a motion on the table to approve non-bargaining group salary increases for the 2014-15 calendar year, or school year? Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion. Anybody? Mr. Phillips.
Just to clarify, I think I understand, Roger, that when we say a salary stipend, we're talking about non-recurring expenses, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when we say increment plus 1% increase, that would be a recurring expense?
That's also correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the contribution to the HSA is a one-time as well.
One-time.
You could repeat it, of course, but it's not a given that it would occur year after year.
Mr. McMichael, could you quantify what the one-time 2% salary stipend might be, as well as the increment plus 1%? How much would that be costing the district?
Estimated, it's about $180,000 for our general fund and our referendum fund combined for the 2%
For the 2%.
stipend, and about $165,000 for the recurring cost of the increment and the 1% at the top and bottom.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Freed?
Okay, to make sure that we're all on the same page here, if I would just happen to be a first-year principal on the first year on the salary last
Yep.
year, then I would move to step 2, provided I was highly effective or effective.
That's correct.
However, if I'm going to be a first-year principal this year, I'll get 1% more than the person who was the first-year principal last year.
Yes.
So basically, when you say 1%, it's just that one step that gets the 1%. Everybody else just gets the increment.
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions, discussions? Okay. And may I ask, I do have one other question. Last year, we approved the non-bargaining group prior to having a teacher contract.
Yes.
Is the rationale, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the rationale, the reason we're doing this now is because their contract is a July to July contract?
It is. All of our employees are now on a July 1, June 30th schedule. Now, teachers are on a July 1, June 30th schedule as well, technically at least. I think our contract says July 1 to June 30th. But unless, typically, of course, we know school starts more like August the 11th. And so, and we also know that by statute, collective bargaining does not officially start until August the 1st. And so if you wanted to settle your teacher contract in July, you wouldn't have the authority to do that, even if you wanted to. I mean, you can discuss informally, but you cannot formally bargain, and you certainly can't settle a contract prior to you formally bargaining. Thus, it's guaranteed it's going to be after August the 1st. So even though it may say this contract's for July 1 to June 30th, as a practical matter, it really starts sometime after August. And as far as the impact of the employee, the teacher doesn't start work until, the middle of August, whereas the custodian or the secretary, if they're 12 months, or the administrator that's 12 months, they're going to start, their year starts July 1st, and they're actually on the job first day of July. So thus the reason that contract-wise and schedule-wise, all these employees start July 1st.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Hackett?
Thank you. I just have one clarification. On the contribution to the HSA, remind me, is this the second year of the HSA contribution incentive?
I believe this is the third year.
This will be the third year, okay.
Any other questions? Okay, then we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor of supporting the non-bargaining group salary increases for the 2014 school year signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Moving on to discussions, we have Dr. Dudley and Mr. McMichael on elementary school fees.
Okay, I'll start this off since I'm kind of on a roll here. So that, and actually the first part I was heavily involved with. So in your report, it's noted that that Carmel Schools has charged a supply fee for kindergarten students for a number of years. I don't know how many years, but it's been numerous years. But for grades 1 through 5, we have not charged a supply fee, but rather we have each school by grade level has established a list of supplies that is given to the parent with the expectation that in addition to paying what we call textbook rental, which also may have fees, particularly at the secondary level, that elementary parent is expected to provide that list of elementary supplies, scissors, crayons, glue, etc. And so that's been the practice. And so over a year ago, we began to have discussions with our parent group, the PTO council, as well as our principals, and then in turn eventually asked our principals to also talk to teachers, of course, and said, a couple of things here. One is if from the parents' perspective, we're sending them a bill for textbooks and so forth, but then we're giving them this list, so the bill's not all the money they're going to spend. They're also going to spend, in this case, an average of about $45 for various supplies. And they purchase those supplies either at local retail outlets, or many of the parents and many of the PTOs bought kits. There are companies out there that do this for a living, and they will provide a kit in a nice cardboard box all ready to go, and all you have to do is pay a high price for it. And so many of our parents had opted for that because probably they're busy and they didn't want to run around to all the stores. And so I'm comfortable in saying that the majority of people that we talked to thought this would be a great idea for the parents, in that they would, we think, save money because we're buying these supplies at substantially, and I'm talking about 35 to 45% less money than it costs when you buy them in the kit. Because we're buying them in bulk and we're not buying them in a cardboard box and so forth. And so ultimately this was well received, and that's why you're seeing it this evening. And then the second piece is that not only is the pricing much better, but we plan to reuse a number of items. In the past, you would buy the list of supplies, but at the end of the year, your child would come home. I know mine did, with crayons and scissors and chewed up pencils and things. But I ended up with 3 or 4 over the years, 3 or 4 bottles of half-empty Elmer's glue. Now, my choice was I could have sent my child back to school with a half-empty box of glue and crayons that had been used and so forth. But but we didn't. But I will tell you, there are parents that do that because they're frugal and they may have 3 or 4 kids, and these things aren't cheap. So there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't mean to imply that there's anything wrong with it. But we have various situations out there. So what this recommendation is to include that we would buy the supplies and include them then in the book billing, and that there won't be a separate list, and you write one check or pay one amount and be done with it. I want to emphasize that when this was put out there, I had emails from 25 or 30 parents, and these weren't the greatest idea ever emails. These were the ones that said, I spend about $15 on supplies, and I believe them, and I know they do, because they are the ones that go and look for the lost leader items, and they may share from one child to the next child and so forth. Unfortunately, and then the question was, can I opt out of this? And the answer was really, we just don't think that's feasible with 7,000 elementary kids and another 16,000 kids altogether. The thought that we'll have a fee system, whether it be book rental or these fees, that you choose whether you're going to participate or not, and maybe you bring and maybe you don't. We just didn't see that working. So I'm not saying that every parent out there thinks this is a great idea, but I can tell you that a whole lot of them do. And so that's the concept, and we're proposing to establish the fee at $32. And I can tell you we spent over $40 buying the supplies, not $32. But we plan to keep those that are still usable, like the scissors, like the rulers. And so, we don't expect to lose money here, but we also didn't want to charge $40. We started out with $40, and it occurred to me at least that if we charge what they cost, then we can't reuse them because they paid for them, unless they just give them to us or something. And so thus we lowered it to $32. And I don't know what the future will bring. I'm certainly hopeful that unless there's a significant change in just the cost of the items with inflation, that we wouldn't anticipate raising the fee. And if we really get to reusing items more than we were guessing at here, then it could even be less. But we're not expecting it to go up, again, unless over the years it'll go up if the basic cost of the supplies go up. So that is part of this report relative to the fees. But we wanted to share that with you and get your support, and also recognize that, if the fee were $150 last year, it's going to be $182 this year, just because of this. But there's a trade-off here in that you won't also be given the list. So the increase in fee doesn't mean there's actually a net increase to the family, at least not for this portion, because this will be, we think, for most parents, more than offset by not having to go out and buy the items that we're now going to provide and include in what you paid as a fee. So that's the first item. And then the second item has to do with the language arts adoption. And as you can see from the report, this was a very expensive adoption. And we think on one hand, we've got wonderful materials, and Amy can speak to this, but we're very excited about the materials that are available this time around for language arts, but they're expensive. And so Amy will have some other comments, but when we get to the bottom here, what we're recommending is that we subsidize this cost, about $80,000, and the result of that would be is we would cap the increase for 2014-15 for elementary, because the adoption was particularly expensive at the elementary level. And so we would cap that increase at not more than 5% from what it was for 13-14. Now, the $32 would be in addition to that, but you understand that's offset by them not having to buy the materials. And so I'll stop there and see, and Amy, I think, has some more specific comments relative to the language arts adoption.
And as Mr. McMichael said, looking at capping that at 5%, so that would be a one-time expense of $80,000 from the general fund that we're recommending to be, acknowledging the cost to our families and making sure that we're keeping that reasonable. As far as we look at the cost of the language arts adoption, some of the differences from last time to this time. Last time for our literacy adoption, we used Rigby literacy, and that was inclusive inclusive of the writing piece. One of the pieces, as we looked at the materials and what was available, and we did have a specified list that we had to choose from per the state because of the reading and the Indiana code, we had to choose from a specific set of materials. We felt like our adoption committee, and they made the recommendation that they also needed a supplementary piece for the writing, so that increases it. Another increase to this was, in the past, we've used Zaner Blosser for handwriting, and our Language Arts Literacy Adoption Committee felt very strongly that handwriting without tears, and that's it's more expensive than the Zaner Blosser was in the past. So those are some of the increases that have, and then also just the increase in materials over a 6-year period. So those are some of the reasons that it has increased from our previous time. So we're recommending that we use, we want to make sure we're being sensitive to our parents and our families, and not increase them by, 10% or 15%, but rather capping that at 5%.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dudley. Mr. McMichael? So we have a proposal.
Yes, I've concluded my comments.
Okay. Okay. So we have a proposal on the table.
This is just discussion.
Oh, thank you. Goodness gracious. Thank you for the discussion items. I'm just looking at the wrong thing here. I open up the floor to questions and comments. Mrs. Freed.
Are those items for the elementary, are they disposable or are they reusable items for the literacy program? Is it a textbook or is it, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. The materials that we're talking about in the chart down here, those are reusable. You're actually looking at the fee for all of the elementary programming. That's not just the literacy piece. That's also including with the math, science, and social studies. But yes, the literacy piece is what the textbook rental would be things that they would use over a 6-year time period, and it would be reusable by students. No, this is, I apologize, this is all of the fees that they would pay at that grade level.
Mr. Phillips?
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One, could you please talk about the impact on our lower income families? And two, would I be correct in thinking that a beneficiary of particularly the elementary school supply part of this would be the teachers themselves, who I think it's almost become routine that some teachers have had to dig into their own pockets to pay for supplies for kids.
Those are two very good questions. I'm glad you brought them up because I intended to speak. I was so focused on the benefit of the parents that I didn't get to the teachers. And the parents that qualify for free reduced lunch. So there are two issues there. First with regard to the supplies and how that benefits teachers. Turn this on. How the supplies, providing the supplies and then charging a fee will benefit teachers is that, number one, the teacher will be guaranteed that the supplies that they want, not what the parent happens to buy, but the brand that they want. If they want a certain brand of scissors, they don't just get scissors, they get whatever they ordered. And we're seeing to it that they'll be there when the first day of school comes. And when you give the list to the parent, you can't anticipate 100% of response to that. And Pam's shaking her head because she knows that for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's not just because the parents are responsible or something. It's just for a variety of reasons. Child may move in 2 weeks after school starts. It's just a whole variety of reasons, and so under this system, the teacher is in total control up to the limit of the money, but they're in total control of what they buy. Again, they can't spend more than the fee, and specific to what they buy in terms of the brand and so forth. And so we think that's a real benefit for the teacher to be able to control that. That end result. With regard to the parents that are qualifying for free and reduced lunch, number one, which is about 10% of our population. So for that 10%, as with the past textbook rental fees, there's a whole process for that that's very, very anonymous, appropriately and also legally required on the part of the parent, that they fill out a form that that they tell us what their income is, and if they meet the guidelines, and they send it here, they don't walk it down to the principal's office, or it's just put in the mail, and if they qualify, then they don't pay any of these fees. Now, that has always been the case with the textbook rental fees, if you will. That has not been the case with the supply piece. Now, very good intentioned parents and principals and so forth did everything they could at the school, so I don't want to in any way diminish the effort, but it was just a different system. And so it didn't get submitted for under free and reduced lunch. They would come and basically tell somebody, I can't afford these supplies and so forth. And each school had a way of, they would ultimately find its way to the counselor at that school, and they would do their very best to be very sensitive about this whole issue. But my point is as much effort as was given, you're dealing with 11, in this case, 11 different elementary schools, and different people, and some of them are volunteers in the form of parents that have some involvement in certain aspects of this, and so doing it this way, you fill out one form, and if you qualify, you've taken care of lunch, you've taken care of textbooks, you've taken care of supplies, and you're done. And it's not at all, it's not connected specifically to the school. I mean, it's school district, but not the school that your child is attending. It's a better system. It really is.
Mrs. Niles?
Yes. The fee rental that they are paying, does this cover the whole year? The supplies?
Yes.
So if they run out in the middle of the year or before that, then do they just go to the bookstore and get what they need, as they have in the past?
No. No. Because it won't be so much, it won't be the child that runs out. You'd have to have the class run out, the school run out. Because, for example, the mentality as we go forward, take crayons, for example. Many of these the teachers can buy whatever they want, but I can tell you many of them are now buying what we call class pack. And so they'll buy 300 of every color in a big box. And so instead of little boxes of eight crayons to a box, in which case the box may cost more than the crayons. Packaging, as you might imagine, is truth. I mean, it's expensive. And particularly on lower cost items, literally the package may cost as much or more than whatever's the product. So now they'll buy a class pack, so the child may not have everybody get a pack, 8-pack of crayons. And a lot of times they've taken those and dumped them in a bucket and they, share them at the desk or in, amongst 6 kids or whatever. So there'll tend to be more of that sharing concept with the kids, that whatever you need, here it is. And they do that now, depending on the teacher. They have the choice to do that. As I said, some of them literally will take pencils and so forth out of the package and just put them in a tray or something. So that only becomes a problem, Pam, should the whole school run out, or that whole grade level, which we don't anticipate happening. So the parents will not be expected to pay any more than what's here, and we want to emphasize that, because we also need to tell our staff that this is the program, so you can ask the child to bring in a used sock or something, but where it's literally something that you reasonably expect to be around the house, but not something that has meaningful cost that you'd say, now bring in 3 more notebooks or whatever. We will not expect, the parents do not expect that to happen.
Okay. I know how kids go through supplies, so it's kind of it's going to be an interesting concept.
Yeah, and as Mr. McMichael said, we've been doing this in kindergarten, and so with the kindergarten teachers, they receive this money, and then they purchase, they may not purchase it all at the beginning of the year, so they purchase what they need in those supplies throughout the year. So it really works out, once you get the system going, it's a more seamless. And we've been doing it with kindergarten where they don't run out of their glue sticks, or if they do, they have the money in there to purchase more. And it does work. It's getting it off the ground for that first year, but then after that, it becomes very seamless.
we were fortunate to have kindergarten in the sense, because of some of your questions, just like you asked. We don't have to totally guess, because we have at least one grade level where we have experience at this same approach.
Okay, now, what about organizations and churches and things that have always offered to help with supplies? Are we going to accept those as we have in the past, or are we just going to say, no, we don't need those?
We wouldn't, I don't think we would turn things down like we have gift fund, as you know, and we accept all kinds of, gifts from people, and if somebody, wanted to give the district something, which is different than giving an individual child, we'd certainly consider whatever gift they might want to make to the school district. But again, we would appreciate their effort, but we also would want the supplies to be consistent with the supplies that we're otherwise buying and providing. Otherwise, some gifts become a liability if they're not what you want or what you need.
Yeah, I have two more questions.
But if that could
Is
work
okay?
out, that would be great.
Okay. You said something about collecting supplies at the end of the year. I know in my classroom, my kids had their names on everything, so if it got misplaced, we knew whose it was. So how are you going to do that at the end of the year if you're going to collect rulers and things like that, and they've got names on them?
Probably not going to put their, same way with, I don't know, whatever we do in kindergarten, but probably not put their names on to begin with. Again, the difference is that parent bought that ruler.
Right.
So needed to have your name on it so that, if I lost it versus somebody else lost it, then that's one thing. But we didn't want somebody else taking your ruler and claiming it to be theirs, and then you had to go buy a new one. So there was a reason for that, but it started with the underlying assumption that the parent bought that ruler. Here they're kind of renting the ruler. They really are, because like textbooks we just talked about, instead of on a 6-year cycle, though, we may go, well, we think scissors on average will last about 3 years. So if they cost $1.50, in the end, we'll only need to charge 50 cents. And of course, it's not that simple, because there will be lost scissors and broken scissors and so forth. But
Right.
Like textbooks, I mean, they don't all last 6 years either. But on average, we'll kind of figure out how long these things like rulers and scissors, or if it's Elmer's glue, we go, well, really a bottle of that, if it's that big, on average lasts about 2 years, not one. So in the end, it'll eventually translate to the parent that the fee only need to be half as much, because they're only using half a bottle.
Okay, I got one more question. Applications for free and reduced lunch don't come in until after the school has started.
Yep.
So those applications will be considered late, but that doesn't mean that the kids will, since the whole class gets.
Oh, no, of course not. Same with textbooks.
Right.
What happens is we just don't know when schools start who's going to be expected to pay. And eventually we find out, and then if you didn't qualify for free and reduced lunch, we'd expect you to pay your fees. Otherwise, we don't expect you to pay for them. So that's how that works.
But we don't pay the fees until September.
Right.
So we have some leeway.
Right. And that's why,
But
one
those
reason why, because we want it to all settle
applications
down.
come in after that.
Okay.
Right. That's really not an issue.
Mrs. Freed?
Well, there are a couple things, because Pam just made something off in my brain here, which she does a lot. I know at the high school when I taught geometry and stuff, we had classroom sets of rulers and things like that.
Yeah.
So basically, is it possible that once we get this program going, like for rulers and scissors and some of the things that will last year to year, that we'll reassess at the end of next year, see how much we have to replenish, and possibly $32 could become 30
Well-
or 28 or...
Yeah, almost, except remember, we've already anticipated that from $40 down to $32, because we spent $40 a kid, or more actually, because we were liberal on the enrollment, because as Pam was alluding to, we don't want to assume 100 kids and have 120 show up. So, and we knew that the supplies won't go bad; they don't have a shelf life. So if we buy a little bit too many starting up, we'll have that'll be the first ones we will have next year that we won't need to buy. So it'll catch up with itself eventually. But we've already anticipated this idea of reusing. We just don't know how accurate it will be, which is why we brought it down to $32. Now, having said that, the vendors tell me that and of course, they have a self-serving interest in selling supplies, but even the vendor said, your second year, you'll probably spend, 20 to 25% less money than you did the first year because of the reuse. So again, we don't know exactly, but there's some history out there to give us at least some educated guessing.
And then just for the parents that are out there that actually do enjoy the supply
Yep.
thing, if you have a child like I had, that
Yep.
eyes light up like it's Christmas when
Yep.
the school list comes in, that child will grow up and become a teacher.
I do have a couple questions about specific items and how they fit into the big picture. Recorders?
Yep. Same thing we're looking at. Now, I know what
And I ask that because their mouths are on
Right.
these items, and they have them
I
for
know.
3 consecutive years, and
Yep. And, we talked about recorders, and I said, the silverware you used at the local restaurant today, this morning was used by somebody else. And like the silverware, to the extent we would reuse recorders, we absolutely would sterilize them and perhaps literally run them through the dishwasher, same as the silverware. So once you get past thinking of that, and then, or at least when you think about that, think about the silverware story, and it won't bother. It may still bother you. You probably will never eat in a restaurant again, but but you'll have a cheap recorder.
and then the calculator. I know 4th and 5th graders.
Calculators aren't a part of this.
Okay, so the student will be required to purchase a calculator, or how does that fit in?
I don't know how that works.
Currently, students are not required to purchase calculators in 4th and 5th grade. We have class sets of the T115s and the, I think the T8s, or I can't remember the exact calculators, but they're not required to purchase the calculators in all the schools.
It seems like we pass all these costs along to parents, but we actually do buy a number of things with
Well,
tax.
for a number of years, I'd been purchasing calculators, and so I was just curious in elementary, because they all have a calculator
To take into school or to use at home?
that they have for their personal use. So I was just wondering how that fit into the big picture, so they will no longer be required to purchase
Perhaps the
one.
Spannenbergs can donate to one of the classes.
No, the Spannenbergs have reused theirs
Sponsor.
multiple years in a row. Are there any other questions or comments? My last comment, we typically do not take action unless it's a regular meeting. So our next regular meeting will be at the end of August. Does that provide ample time for you to get things rolling?
Yeah, we're
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And, another question?
No, it's a good question.
Okay. Moving on to substitute teacher pay, Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mrs. Spanenberg. Before I talk about substitute pay, I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that with the board's consent action this evening on the personnel report, you were granting your authority to hire Ms. Sarah Moore, who's in the audience. Sarah is a graduate originally of Indiana University and then Butler University. Mrs. Freed, thought you'd like that. She's been a teacher at Washington Township since 2007, and after a thorough interview process led by Mrs. Storer, we've selected Ms. Moore as the assistant principal and intervention teacher at Mohawk Trails, and I believe she has with her this evening her fiance and her mother to join in the excitement of joining Carmel Clay Schools. So we want to welcome Sarah to our team.
Congratulations, Sarah.
I promised her we wouldn't make her speak or sing a song or whatever. Yeah, no, I didn't give. Thank you for letting me take a moment to do that, and welcome, Sarah. Next, we wanted to bring to the board for discussion this evening a recommendation to increase the pay for our substitutes in the district for the 2014-15 school year. As follows in the recommendation, we would recommend the board to consider paying special education positions $80 per day and regular education or all other positions, if you will, $70 per day. This recommendation comes to the board after careful and thoughtful analysis of our data. For one thing, we continue to seek to try to fill every open position that we have in the district, and we still have unfilled jobs. And I especially, having been a teacher and a principal in the district, I know how difficult that is at the school when we have positions that aren't filled, and that ultimately impacts students somewhere down the line. And we also did an analysis of the surrounding districts. We know, and we respect the fact that substitutes, if they could work in Noblesville and be paid $75 a day as compared to our rate had been $65 a day Monday through Thursday here, and perhaps they live closer to Noblesville and it's less gas money, I too might take the job in Noblesville. So in some sense, we're trying to keep ourselves competitive with the surrounding districts, and we do estimate that certainly there will be an increased cost. You know, if all other things remain equal, which of course they never seem to, but if all things remained equal, we would anticipate an additional cost to the district. But we also, and I think this is something that we're looking at, attempting to use perhaps fewer professional development days this year, and maybe providing professional development in other methods, and thus there might not be a total increase. One note for the board: when we mention special education substitutes, we are addressing those positions which have fewer incidents. In other words, ED, emotional disability, FIATS program, life skills. We would not include in that recommendation our resource positions or early childhood positions. So when we're talking about the differentiated pay, we're specifically focused on those programs and positions that are difficult for us to obtain substitutes for. And that's the recommendation for discussion for this evening. We wanted to get that to the board for your questions, discussion, and then we would anticipate coming back in the future with an action item recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. I open the floor to discussion. Mrs. Hackett.
You answered one of my questions. My other question was, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, we used to pay more on Friday because there were more absences. What were the thoughts there?
That's a great question. What we saw, Mrs. Hackett, I think Roger would say, we talked about that together when we came up with that idea. And I guess the expression that comes to mind is we kind of wind up chasing our tail. And so what the data showed us is that Fridays got better, Thursdays went down. And I didn't anticipate, if I'm a substitute, I may not want to work every day of the week. And so if I have a choice, I'm going to work on the day where they pay me $10 more a day. Who wouldn't? Which might mean that I'm going to choose not to work some other day of the week. So I felt kind of like we had an impact on Friday, but of course this is an example of you don't do things in isolation. It had impacts, I think, in other places, well-intentioned, and I think it helped us on Fridays. The problem is we come to school Monday through Friday, and so I think that was our thought there. One other piece that I wanted to address, as some of you may know, maybe Mrs. Nels or Mrs. Freed especially, as retired teachers, we do pay retired Carmel Clay teachers a higher rate to be a substitute for us, and we would anticipate them receiving the $80 per day rate. And that is a little bit higher than, I believe they've been paid $75 a day previously. So we would intend for them to, we would be happy to talk to you about that.
Other discussion items? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Newman,
Thank
for
you.
bringing that to our attention. And I'll ask the same question. Is an August action item date, is that going to work with your schedule?
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds fantastic. Moving on to superintendent's report.
Just want to let the board know I concluded district goal activities this past week with the community members, and I invited members from the past 2 years of Expedition, Coordinating Council, other support groups, and had it here in the PMR, and it was the same activity utilized with the district leadership team, student advisory, members of the ESC, as well as the discussion culminating from the 15 prep period meetings with all 15 buildings. So that will provide significant amount of stakeholder feedback as we look at themes for 2014-15. So that allows the full cycle of goals to be done that was not afforded last year. So that, I think that was a very well-attended event by those community member groups, and very engaged. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wall. And are you anticipating on sharing some of that information?
All of it
Fantastic.
with you. That's a precursor to all the information you'll get as we look for
Our executives.
themes for our goals for 14-15.
Okay.
Right within our goal cycle.
That sounds great.
You bet.
Board member reports? Mr. Phillips.
Thank you. I think the public has probably heard me announce that I will not be running for this seat in November. I just wanted to remind people that now is the time to submit your petitions if you're interested in the job. I had the pleasure of speaking to a young man at work about the pleasure and honor that is involved in being a school board member. And I hope that capable people will step up and accept that challenge. I certainly would encourage it.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Mr. Phillips. I know we've enjoyed having your perspective and your overall positive attitude on the board, and it's been a pleasure working with you. I know we have 6 more months with you, and we enjoy that.
Not done
I do believe the date to turn in those applications, the start date's going to be July 23rd. And I know I will be turning mine in to run again for my seat.
And I will also.
Okay. So, we've been waiting, and now we know. Okay, with that, I know. With that in mind, I do want to welcome Mrs. Moore to the Carmel Clay School family. We're excited you're joining us, and we hope that you are going to be here for a very long time. And I also want to comment on how well coordinated our administrative staff is today. Everybody's in shades of purple.
I did not notice that.
Those are just one of those things I noticed.
We'd like to have a member. Wow.
Yes, if we would, that would be great.
Trace that loop.
And with that, we will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.